One. Hello, everyone. In this video, I am fortunate enough to sit down a jack of all trades, Zahler himself. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. You may recognize him, in the film world. He's the director behind films such as Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete. On top of being a film director, he's a novelist with books such as Mean Business on North Ganson Street, Hug Chickenpenny, Wraiths of the Broken Land. But we are here to discuss his newest graphic novel from Dark Horse. It's Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. Dude, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I've enjoyed your program, and when you reached out, I checked out some episodes to see what you were about, and happy to come on. So thanks for reaching out.
So,
I
so
like
you're saying you're a mega fan. Can I put that up on my, if I get a Wikipedia page, can I officially say Zahler is one of my biggest fans?
you could say I'm one of your New Yorkist fans.
Yeah, I'll
I'm
take it. I'll take it.
yeah. There you go.
As long as I can attach your name to me somehow, like I said, I do this for commercial gain, not for love or passion. It's all for money and eventually to make a living. So
That's very apparent.
yeah,
And I'll look for that $1 million check that I know you're sending.
yeah.
You're sending to New York right now.
It must have gotten lost in the post. I have that problem with a lot of people I interview. Whenever I send the checks, it never arrives. I don't know. It's not to me. I'm only a cute child, so technically it's your fault for expecting money from me. But dude, so many different things to discuss. First things first, what is the Zahler origin story? I mean, we talked before, and you're a comic book fan. You're a fan of music. You're obviously a fan of film. I mean, growing up, were you reading comics? Were you watching films, or what was that journey like? What's your origin story?
So I'm from Miami originally, in the southern part of Florida, and I've always just been interested in trying to do the things that I enjoy. So
Sure.
there was definitely, before I had any interest in making movies or writing movies, I wanted to be a comic artist. And so when I
Yeah.
was like 11, 12, 13, and first getting, really into comics, which were a lot of Conan the Barbarian, King Conan, Savage Sword of Conan. I had subscriptions to all of them.
Yeah.
Uh, Punisher comics, Batman, sort of what one might expect. Things that are running a little bit on the darker side of mainstream, and then that led me to learning about the underground and other comic stuff. And probably about the time I was 13, 14, I started to get much, much more into movies. And in particular, I
Yeah.
had a friend in Miami whose father had an enormous movie collection. I'm going to say probably something like 700 or 800 movies on video cassette, and had it all filed. And I just learned, I got really into Humphrey Bogart, and I
Yeah.
watched, 10, 20, Humphrey Bogart movies. And I got really into Akira Kurosawa, and was watching that stuff. So that was probably like when I was 12, 13, 14, that sort of transition from wanting to be a comic book artist to wanting to work in movies. I was reading a lot at the time. Around that time, I really got into H.P. Lovecraft,
Oh,
uh, and eventually into science fiction. So that was really, in terms of the origin story, I was really into books, I was really into comics, and I was really into movies. And now I do all those things. And
yeah.
music was there as well. Like the first band where I was ever really into them and reading along with the lyrics was Pink Floyd, and that goes actually into the elementary school days.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it comes from. It's all these things I'm interested. I do. The one piece of the puzzle that's not quite there is I've always been a foodie. When I was like a little kid, my dad's dressing me up in suits, and we're going and having nice meals at the nicer places in Florida. And so I'm like, it's 7, 8 year old having escargot and souffle, and was really into fine dining at a young age. And the most consistent like day job I had after college, before writing and movie making and all that stuff took off, was I was a catering chef for about 9 years. So it kind of just comes down to the things I like. There's a certain point past which I want to explore it deeper and deeper, and then eventually do my own version of it.
Yeah, dude, that's fascinating. And I mean, you talk growing up. I'm really surprised you didn't gravitate towards characters like Superman and all these brighter characters. I feel like that's so, transparent in your work. I really felt like you would have been on the more optimistic side. But I can picture little Zala read. Well, you talk Punisher. It wouldn't have been Garrett's run because Garrett's run wasn't until 2000 and something.
Correct, which is superb, and I'm happy to talk about it at length. The original ones, and I can say this: when I was 12, in 11 and probably about into 13. And like when I was first collecting comics, it was certainly art first. And I was picky enough that I would start to find artists I liked. And so that initial Punisher stuff that I read, and I remember buying it at Al's News in Miami, where actually there was this shootout with the FBI like two blocks away from this. At that time, that was big news.
So now I know why you are the way you are, because you grew up around FBI shootouts. That's your
yeah. It was in that. I mean, I was in like a middle class neighborhood, but it did happen. It did happen. And there's a TV movie version of it with like David Soul and Michael Gross. But I digress. That on their news rack, they had the Punisher miniseries, the one where that Mike Zeck drew. I'm trying to think who wrote it. Was it Mike? Was it Mike Barron? Maybe.
Yeah. Yes, Mike Barron did do Punisher. I think he might have done it with Zeck. Now that you mention it, yeah.
So it was the Mike Zeck stuff with the beautifully painted Zeck covers, and there was a huge stall out. I mean, I remember at the time waiting for that. I think that last issue, because I think it was something like number one of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, 4 of 4. But then there was a 5th issue. I think there was something weird with it not quite ending. And then eventually it ended, and probably like in that period again, I started to just get more and more into comics. And then really the thing that changed me from a guy who's buying Spider-Man or Punisher or Conan or all these things at the store to actually going to a comic book shop. And I was going to a place called Coral Comics that was pretty close to me. I could bike to it. The thing that really like changed me was I read, and the first issue I got was actually the 2nd issue, but of Dark Knight Returns. I saw the cover, and it was, it was new. I'm like, this looks great. This doesn't look like a Batman I know. And I mainly knew Batman from like cartoons and the TV show, which were obviously very goofy and campy compared to what Frank Miller did. And,
sure, yeah, 100%.
And so that was the thing. When I read that 2nd issue, I can say that was what changed it to, let me just go to a local news store or bookstore and see what comics they have on the spinner, to I have a polls list at a comic book store and would go in there and get my weekly polls, because, and that was something like I remember very early on getting interested in Todd McFarlane. So like I have, and actually I still have all those issues, like the Hulks that he did, and I was kind of on board for the durations of those runs.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty primo time, like comics switching from 60 cents to 75 cents. Like that was the era when I was getting just tons of polls and all that sort of stuff. But during that point, because I was taking art classes and stuff in high school and all of that, I was never really that satisfied with my drawing, which to some extent holds true to this day. But I just got more and more into movies, in particular, initially movie makeup special effects. Like the first thing I wanted to do in movies was movie makeup. And I mean,
practical effects is something that's very evident in your work.
Right. I would rather not. I would rather shoot around something than have a CG effect. Like that is, and even and I can say, like, overall, I got what I needed in terms of the practical effects, I think, in my movies. But even in some places where maybe they fall a little short in some spots, my preference is I would rather something fall short and it's practical, because then it's a tangible, real thing, than it falls short and it's digital, which happens in huge, like gigantic budget movies. In which case, if it falls short and it's digital, you just feel like you're looking at pixels.
Yeah.
To me, there's nothing tangible there. So like a practical effect that lands at an 80% mark to me is better than a CG effect that lands at a 95% mark. So that's, that was my approach. But that was my initial interest, was doing movie makeup, and I would experiment on friends and build stuff. And I was really into all of that stuff. And then eventually, as I got more and more into, let's say, movies that weren't horror movies and that had those sorts of creatures, as I got more and more into, growing up, Martin Scorsese was definitely like my favorite director. It's like a kid. And, Taxi Driver is top 5 all-time favorite movie of mine to this day. And I adore that movie. And the first major movie I ever worked on, and it was as a PA, as a production assistant, I was still in high school, was Cape Fear. So that was very like surprised. Like I'm on set and there's Martin Scorsese, and I'm doing security outside Robert De Niro's trailer, and I'm like a, like a high school dork wearing a Rush t-shirt, and and had that whole experience. So so it comes down to the stuff I enjoy, I want to be involved in, and I want to actively actively pursue, and I've been fortunate enough to do it, and also relentless enough to do it. It's not like the first script I wrote went out, and it was sold, and the first time I tried to get a movie made, it got made.
Yeah.
Or everyone, like, I released an album, and people wanted immediately. Like, there are many more rejections and people turning my stuff down than there are purchases and acceptances. But like, all you need is that one person to fund your movie, that one person to put out your comic, or that one person to put out your album, and then it's out there in the world.
Yeah, dude, that's so fascinating. You grew up so many different points there. And funny enough, the second director I've talked to who got their start PAing on Scorsese, I talked to Alfonso Gomez Rejon, who directed Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, and he worked as Scorsese's PA, and he was on Casino. So that just shows there must be magic on the Scorsese set that gets you in Hollywood. But I mean, you talked there, something that was really interesting I picked up there was you talked about The Dark Knight. And I mean, before we get obviously too nerdy, was this when Dark Knight was actually in stores coming out? Because that was the year of, it was Watchmen, it was Dark Knight. Sorry?
Was it 80? Was it 1986?
I think it's 6 or 7, but it was like that. It was Dark Knight, Watchmen, and I swear there was one more. It might have been. Oh, there was one more comic that was big that year. I don't think it was Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. Maybe that came out because I don't know if he put out Watchmen and Swamp Thing in the same time.
So it was definitely, so when I got the Dark Knight number 2 that I got, I think was a second printing, so it was late enough that had happened, but I don't know that I don't think the last issue had come out, so it was during the run. And I know already by the time I had polls that Watchmen was still coming out, because the guy who ran Coral Comics said, "Oh, you should read this comic. This is probably the best comic ever made." And at the time, it was a little bit too dense for me. I mean, that's one of my, I can, if at some point I can go pull a page of Watchmen original art off my wall and hold
what original Watchmen art? No way. Oh, dude, is that an actual original Dave Gibbons?
This is an original Dave Gibbons. So when I was that age, I'm trying to think how old I would have been. Let's say 12.
Oh, that's so cool, man. You can't just pull that up out of nowhere. If I'm ever a director, that's what I'm going to spend my money on. Never mind a house or, a mortgage. Just buy a Dave Gibbons original.
Well, but you and me are like-minded in that way. And I could tell you, like, for me, there was about a decade where I made a living as a catering chef in New York City, and I'm like barely getting by and getting behind on my bills and all that sort of stuff. And the screenwriting thing really took off for me. I wrote a Western called Brigands and Rattleboards. I got a 3-picture deal. And when I got that deal, I got that piece of art, which at the time, by the way, is a fraction what it would cost now. Like, that didn't cost me.
It must have been, man. You get
now it's pretty valuable, but and it wasn't that it didn't have value then, but like, actually, like, knock a digit off of like what original Watchmen artwork sells for now compared to what I got it in, and it would have been 2004. And I mean, I could tell you the original comic art market, because I'm pretty tapped into that, and I have some other things I could share. That actually really blew up at a different level even during the pandemic. Like, I've seen art where it was like where it's like, I feel like 3 years ago it would have gone for half or less than what it went for before. Just other things like Chester Gould, Dick Tracy and Carl Barks, Donald Duck stuff, like all this stuff. I can look at the prices literally of 4 years ago, and for a lot of that stuff, it's half of what it's going for right now. So I think crazy. I think that exploded. But I'm with you when you say you wouldn't get a fancy car. And I'm living in the same apartment I lived in as a catering chef. And when I would sell a screenplay, or like have really make a good deal, which is what I did for a long time before I did Bone Tomahawk. Yeah, I've sold or had optioned, I think, 23 different scripts in Hollywood and abroad. A lot of different pieces. Yeah, and my reward for that was something like, I just showed you that Watchmen page. You know, it would be something like that. I love, on a different side of the comic spectrum, I really like Chris Ware. I don't know if you're into his work.
Yeah.
And so like, you know what, you know, somebody else where I'm like, oh, let me, you know, like I acquired a piece, or you know, like a Frank Miller Sin City page.
That'd be
And
great.
so that you know, that is like, I live in New York. One of the reasons I live here is I like walking everywhere. Occasionally I take a
Yeah.
subway, but I don't have a car, so there's no money getting spent on a car. You know,
Can
my
you?
place, you know, my, like, these are rewards for me. And it's because, like, even with doing all the film success stuff, I've just always prized illustration and comics and animation, because I have a bunch of animation cells as well. You know, that my interest in that has always been really, really strong. And in film school, I studied writing a little bit, cinematography more, but I had a real focus on hand-drawn animation. And that was
Yeah.
something that I had wanted to do, but then cinematography kind of took off for me. And then I started directing plays and just doing a bunch of different things, you know, in my spare time. But what would be your, if you could have any piece of art from any comic you enjoy, what
All
would it be
right,
like?
dude. Now we're getting into it. Now we're getting into it. A piece of art from any comic, off the top of my
Or you
head.
could pick three. If one is too difficult, if one is too challenging a choice, what would you pick?
Imagine a Frank Whiteley original, like just anything. Maybe I don't know
Does
what book.
my question on Quitely, because he's a fantastic super talent. I thought at some point I saw some originals of him and they were pencil. Does he do pencil and have a digital ink, which would be cool, by the way? Like,
I
if
think he does. I swear he even does blue pencil as well. I don't know
okay,
if he. I don't know. I think you might be right in him getting. I think he might ink his own work as well, but I think he does it digitally, because I got to interview him and it was like 2 hours and I played a slideshow and we just ran through his whole career from Authority to
right,
Superman. And dude, he is an amazing artist, dude. That's a good.
yeah.
That's a really good question. I've never had this flip back onto me. All Star Superman be up there. What about you? You have Watchmen. Is that the pinnacle? Are you happy with
I
Watchmen?
mean, I would love to have Dark Knight. I straight up can't afford it. Like, those
Yeah.
are astronomical. The
Oh,
Dark
they
Knight, and it's and I think it's a different thing because and those are two books. I mean, those are two. You ask me my favorite comic books of all time. Watchmen and Dark Knight. They're both going to be on that list.
Yeah, they'd have to be.
They're both going to be on that list. But I think a difference in terms of why, because it's like, well, why are like the Dark Knight stuff's extraordinarily expensive, but I think some of it is there are a lot of Dark Knight pages that don't have Batman. So people, like, obviously, like, getting a Dark Knight page that doesn't have Batman, where's like the value for that is going to be less, and like my interest and probably most people's interest would be far less. And additionally, Batman has the thing where it's the singular voice, where it's the guy who wrote it, drew it.
Yeah.
uh, you know, like like I've read a bunch of, you know, things that Gibbons illustrated that aren't Watchmen, and so there you have the writer and artist teaming up together. And I think I mean, there's something special to me, in terms of, like, if I like looking at comics and my favorite comic creators, where it is that singular voice, like a Chris Ware or Carl Barks or Frank Miller or Jack Kirby in
Yeah.
that post Stan Lee period, like all of these guys, where it's just a single creator. There's like a special value to that, for me anyways. And maybe that's why it would be Dark Knight. But, like, yeah, probably a great Dark Knight page would certainly be at the top.
I agree. So just pump out another film and then just get that page going, man. Tell you what,
Yeah, yeah. Let's crank that shit out to feed my original art addiction.
just 3 years call up. So what are you doing
Yeah,
next week? We'll get the if you say it's about grief, they might give you an Academy Award. So then we're 2 for 2, and we'll get it going.
sure.
But dude,
It will be an important message movie to get me the award.
But dude, that's so amazing. I mean, you brought up there, and I love that singular voice aspect. And of course, like, leads me amazingly. We've just been being nerds for the last couple of minutes, but let's talk. Obviously, your book, Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. I mean, you talk singular voice. This book is a singular voice from you. I mean, it's you. Well, you're writing it, you're drawing it. Are you inking it? Are you doing the inking and lettering?
Absolutely everything.
You
It,
crazy man. I mean, I
it
always thought, and it's like, you'd be surprised how many people will do everything except for the letters. No one will touch lettering. I mean, 80 comic book creators, probably more now. Lettering, Seems to be something no one will touch. So what was that like? Let me just. I don't know if you've been asked about lettering yet, but
I have not been asked about lettering. It's I came up with a system. So I did with my first comic, Forbidden Surgeries of the Hideous Dr. Divinus. Like I just said, I want everything on the page, and you and I discussed earlier the idea of just doing everything practically. So I wanted everything practical. I didn't want digital. I didn't want letters put in after. I want to look at the page now and make adjustments. Because I want everything on the original page. It led to like in some spots where there was like maybe a spelling error or spacing error. When I wanted to correct it, I'm literally going on another sheet of Bristol paper, rewriting it, cutting it out. I had to do a little like surgery, cutting it out, rubber cement, pasting it on there, like taking a picture of that image, sending it to Dark Horse for them to just replace that one letter that was maybe wrong, or put in a comma where there wasn't a comma or something like
yeah.
that. There's a little bit extra pain in the butt with doing it, but to me, I wanted the pages in the comic book to be exactly the same as the original art pages, albeit like they're smaller, and that's kind of standard. I did these pages. It's the what is it, 11.5 by 17, the normal Bristol board paper. So like the paper that people switched to at some point, I think maybe in the 70s. So like it's the same paper as like this Watchmen page. It's the same paper as here. This is John Romita Jr.
You haven't. You just didn't talk about your original John Romita Jr. as well, dude.
I'm a huge fan of his stuff. I think,
so
and I actually am a fan. I like the modern, more stylized stuff. Even more than his slightly more realistic stuff. Like I sense of motion on the page with him is fantastic.
I love when you can tell just with the way he draws characters, and it's the same with Quietly in People. Sometimes you look at ours and it's like the way they utilize anatomy. They kind of, whether it's the broad shoulders or for Frank Miller, you're looking at a Miller character. Same with Romita, same with Quietly. So, dude, yeah, I love that, man. But that's it. That's a really great page. But I mean, yeah, the singularity of it all, you doing it. I mean, talk about, and I think you mentioned this in an interview. One of the reasons you didn't want to just script it and have someone else draw is because you've been doing screenplays your whole life. I mean, you talked there 23 unproduced screenplays on top of your actually produced screenplays, on top of writing books as well. So, I mean, was a huge part of this just wanting to have fun with the art and just explore as an artist? Was that a huge part?
I mean, for me, and this is probably the case with a lot of people who just go on to do different things. Like in the arts, like the first thing I wanted to do as an artist was draw. And as I said, like before I had any interest in going into movies, I wanted to draw comics. And the other thing but I did also have that interest in animation at that time.
Yeah.
Like I remember watching that like Ralph Bakshi Mighty Mouse that was on in the 80s, and pretty unhinged stuff. And a lot of that stuff's really great. It holds up well. But I remember watching things like that. And I was the original generation of anime watchers, because I like the only way I could watch a lot of those movies was someone would take a video cassette and record a copy off of a laser disc, and I would watch these things without translations, like Bubblegum Crisis or the Golgo 13 movies, like Vampire Hunter D, all the stuff that's readily available now and translated. And of course, better to watch with subtitles or dubbed than just wondering what's going on. But I was so interested in that stuff back then. And sometimes I would pause and watch frame by frame, and all different kinds of animation. I was watching Disney stuff, and I have a huge affinity for a lot of that old Disney stuff, like Pinocchio, Lady and the Tramp. And so my interest in hand-drawn art, be it illustration, fine art, comics, animation, like it's just always been there. So to answer your question in terms of why I did this, that's like like no matter how many movies I make, if I make 3, I make 1, I make 10, this isn't fulfilling that itch. Like this is not satisfying that desire. And I also know, I was realistic when I went into it. I was like, it's been a while since I've done drawing consistently, and I know, particularly for my first comic, the art's going to be below par. But I'm very confident in my abilities as a storyteller, like as a novelist and screenwriter, and even like in the music, in the songs that I write, like there's stories that are unfolding in some of those. So I just felt like, well, the art should as long as the art is clearly telling the story, the story that I write should be good enough to carry it forward. And I really feel that was the case with the first one that I did, where I was really just kind of checking out, like, can I tell a story clearly with this medium? And kind of the moment I finished that comic, and I enjoy, I'm proud of that work. But
Oh
the
yeah.
moment I finished it, Forbidden Surgeries of the Hideous Dr. Divinus, I was like, probably like 20% of these panels do I really like. But I do feel that all of the panels tell the story well. And kind of leading up to that whole decision of me doing it all myself and drawing it, and like you said, like, I didn't just want to have someone draw it. I've been in touch with like many comic artists who are far, far, far more skilled than I am. But I would never get better if I had someone else draw it. And I also felt that even though I might come up short in the
Yeah.
technical abilities and rendering and anatomy, I would be able to tell the story well. And that's something where I read, there's a comic called Wimbledon Green by Seth, which is an excellent, excellent comic.
Yeah.
And one of my couple favorites for this millennium. And his drawing style is extremely simple and cartoony, but and he does it very cleanly and more cleanly than I could do it. But when I read that comic, I felt like, okay, if you tell it clearly with the images, and the writing is good, and the writing for Wimbledon Green is superb, it's worth telling. And that was one of the last pieces that really decided me like on this journey of, let me see what I can do. But like, I'm confident in my abilities as a visual storyteller, as a filmmaker. And even if some of the rendering comes up short, or some of the anatomy comes up short, or some of the shading, or some of the compositions, like, I'm going to tell that story clearly. And there are artists who are much more skilled than I am as illustrators, who may not even tell the story as clearly. So that was one thing, as like with a little bit of my background with studying animation and as a filmmaker, why I think I did have a bit of an advantage in terms of telling the story clearly.
Dude, that's amazing. And funny enough, now that I think about it, I think you might be the first person I've chatted to who not only makes films, but also makes comics. And I feel like that just opens up, a leeway for questions to ask. And I mean, something, I guess, it's like the Scorsese golden rule about filmmaking is like, what story are you telling in this frame right now? What is this certain frame in a film telling? And it's the exact same for a panel of a comic book. Every artist has to sit down and say, what is this frame telling people right now? And there are similarities between the two. Have you noticed that? Do you think, say you just did this comic having never made a film before, just being a comic book fan, would the process be different? Would you suffer?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And one of the things is, I can say specifically, like, I look at my 2 comics, and I'm gearing up in the coming year to begin my 3rd, because I'm a big believer in doing 3 of kind of everything before, moving on or returning to other things. But I know as a director, I like very low key performances, very controlled performances.
Yeah, you can see that.
And I like, I'll point to, Mel Gibson's performance in Dragged Across Concrete, and Kurt Russell in Bone Tomahawk. I really like their performances, and I think they're particularly controlled, and there's a lot of subtext and a lot of depth, and that's something that I really like to have. And Vince's performance in Brawl in particular is this tour de force, but there's a lot of him kind of stone faced with the rage simmering underneath and hurt simmering underneath. And one of the things that I kind of take from my directing into comics is I like subtlety. And although certainly in my first comic book, some of the drawings are just straight up clumsy, I think less so in my second one. I do think I advanced significantly. And not for nothing, my first comic was kind of turned down by all of my kind of favorite publishers. And my second comic, every publisher I wanted made an offer on it. With Dark Horse, I have a ton of history with them, but it seems just like I wasn't like, it's not just me deluding myself that I've improved. Like the market showed like a complete interest, whereas the first one, and Floating World Comics, who published the first one, they're an awesome indie comic publisher, but clearly like a place like Dark Horse has a different amount of reach. They're just going into regular bookstores. On top of comic stores and all that sort of stuff. But something that comes over from film into comics is I like these low key performances, and if you look through, like through these books, I think that they're pretty controlled in terms of the reactions. Like, I'm trying to make something small more significant, and that's something that Chris Ware does in his. I think he's one of the best artist, one of the best cartoonists in the history of the medium. He's in my all-time top 5 for sure. And sometimes, and it's something I studied, like looking at with his work, was that like those really small movements, like a little movement of the eyebrows or the eyes, or just a panel where nothing happens and the person and the person is exactly the same as the previous. And that in a screenplay I would write out as beat, between like maybe 2 lines of dialogue, like, hey, what are you doing, beat? Why aren't you answering me? And putting in that pause, like that does connect very much to laying out panels. And so that's something where in my comic books, particularly the second one, where I just kind of understood the craft a little bit better, I think it really translates to sometimes I'll dedicate 2 or 3 panels to showing a minor shift in emotion because it's really important, whereas sometimes I'll have a panel that has a ton of dialogue because the person delivering that dialogue is in the same emotional state throughout. And so that's the kind of thing, because I would think with an actor, I would be discussing a beat change, which is maybe you're moving from like really excited about something to now you're terrified. And I don't want to show both of those emotions in the same panel. And and in a movie, you might have a tighter shot and show that change. So that stuff very much does connect. And then there's one other thing that also really connects is I'm very conscious of, do I want you to read the dialogue before I look at you, before you look at the image, like kind of spend more time with the image, or after? So I'll put like maybe a line of dialogue up top and then the character's face, and then a line of dialogue down at the bottom. And that's another way to get that pause that I would write beat in a screenplay, like kind of direct an actor to take a little bit more time with the dialogue. So it absolutely, going through the experience of making these 3 movies, and it was really right as Dragged Across Concrete was coming out that I started drawing the first comic. So it was really like hot on the heels of that. I said, okay, I've done these movies. I have my 3 out. I certainly intend to make more. But like I really want to do some comics.
Dude, it's amazing. And I completely understand what you brought up there about comics. I mean, there are just certain things you can do in comics, and I'll never not be impressed by the innovation that's happening every day. There's like, I'm not sure if you read Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye, but it's one of my favorite comics. And there's sign language in that comic, and it's the craziest thing to me. They literally have characters doing sign language. I think it's towards the end of the book, and there's these kind of diagrams that pop up, and it's so interesting when you do something like that, because especially having 2 deaf parents is something that really amazes me when you can do something like that in a medium. And I love what you were talking about, like beats, and I guess I never kind of correlate that, but there's obviously beats in your films as well, just as there is in your comics. And I mean, you talk beats. I guess there was that moment in Watchmen where, they zoom in on Ozymandias and they zoom in on his bloody hand, and he opens it and he's holding the bullet. And you're just like, what the fuck? It's just, I mean, when you can do beats like that in a medium. So let me ask you this, you've obviously done film. Are you more confident doing film as you are at the comic book? Because you've done a comic before. You have 3 films under your belt. Are you confident doing both? What's the process like?
So I mean, I think I'm pretty self-aware. Like my art, like we're talking about like Frank Whiteley or Miller, or someone like Brian Boland or Bernie Wrightson or Richard Corbin, or like all these people I've been reading for for decades. And I know the limitations of my art. Like my art in the second comic book, I think, is quite a bit better than the first. No one's going to hold it up to Brian Boland and think like, oh wow, this compares to that. I think I'm telling the story really, really clearly. So I think with comics, I want to see progress. Like if my second comic book looked no better than my first, that would be disappointing. But I learned a lot of lessons with the first. The single most important lesson that I learned is don't ink the page the day you draw in pencil. Like get some distance and circle back so you can see, oh shit, the eyes are uneven, this composition is weird, the perspective is off, or this is like, or this background element is stacking weirdly with the character's head, and now this coat rack in the background makes it look like the guy has antlers. Like where you get a little bit more perspective by doing that. So in terms of confidence, I'm absolutely most confident as a writer. And so that feeds into all of these. Like I'm more confident as a writer than I am as a director. I have much more experience, and obviously, like as a director,
you're comfortable in that. That's your medium.
I mean, the thing is, I'm pretty comfortable doing all these things, but in terms of like my reach exceeding my grasp and that sort of stuff. Like I feel as a writer, I can just do what I want. There aren't the parameters of time, of budget. I'm working on a movie set. Like throughout the process of making a movie, I'm going to be dealing with like a minimum of 100 people. So those are variables that you're not dealing with when you are writing a screenplay or writing a book, or as I did for both of my comics, writing the short story out in like full prose form that then becomes the comic. So that's the thing I'm most confident in, but partially just because there are fewer variables, and mainly because I've done it the most. Like I've written 9 novels, I've written 53 screenplays, I've written the stories for these comics, I've written a lot of heavy metal music criticism, and I just have I have the most confidence with that, and there are the fewest things that can come into play. Like with the comic, even if I'm doing everything by myself, you know, there's just going to be errors, and like, what are the errors that you go in and try and fix? Like at the end of the comic, when I go back and I look at a page, I'm like, man, a lot of this page is lousy. I'm just throwing away the page and redrawing it, or this page is all good enough, but this one panel stinks. Let me redraw that panel, cut it out with the X-Acto knife, and rubber cement and stick it on there. So yeah, I have the most confidence with that. But actually, after writing fiction, the thing I've written the most of is music, because I have 9 albums out there and all these different like synthesizer stuff, soul music. The soundtracks for all 3 of my movies I did with my songwriting partner Jeff Harriet. So I have 9 albums, like synthesizer stuff, soul music, orchestral stuff, heavy metal, black metal, like, so that's something where I know I'll come up with. But because my understanding of music theory is a little bit limited, I don't necessarily know if it's going to take me 2 hours to come up with a song or 10. So
really,
it's different. Whereas like with writing fiction, I pretty much know a day of writing fiction is going to be a certain amount of hours, give or take 1 or 2, depending on other things going on.
I mean, they're all different mediums, man. It's interesting. I mean, obviously there's bound to be differences, but I mean, the fact that you do it all will kind of never not amaze me. But we talked about this in the initial message. Let's talk a little bit just Garth Dennis. I mean, we're just getting weird with it. I mean, you a Garth Dennis fan? I mean, there's one in Dragged Across Concrete. There's this one scene, and I love it so much. Actually, I'd say it's in my top 5 favorite Zahler scenes. But I won't really spoil it, but I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Guy has a machine gun, wastes a guy, looks up to the TV, shoots it, looks down, and then just shoots some more. And I was like, and just the way it's color graded, it's such a great scene. So, I mean, dude, let me ask you this: Are you a Garth Dennis fan? I mean, obviously, I assume you're a fan of most.
Dennis fan. I want to point. You're the first person who's ever pointed out that scene in the ever. Who's pointed out that scene? And that was, of every shot in the movie, probably the most time consuming to set off, because it's all live explosives, like the rounds needed to go,
and it's static. You keep the camera kind of just
and so to me, by doing it static and having everything really happening, and that actor happened to be a stuntman on top of it, so it was really capable, because I think we did like kind of 2 full takes of it. In one take, the gun jammed at the end and he improvised well, and then the second take, but they had to reset the entire store. They had to put new glasses in the fridge, new beers, new chips, new TV, like everything had to be reset. And of any shot in the movie, that was just the most time consuming reset. Really? We just had like there were few shots in the movie where there was that much time allotted to it. There's one car smashing into a van that might have been sort of similar time.
Oh, towards the end.
Yes. But it's cool that you pointed that out and you noticed it, because, and that was one of the things. I looked at my DP and he looked at me. I'm like, this is a oneer. Like, this should all unfold in this way, but it's not. Like, I can't think of seeing a scene like that in any mainstream movie in decades, like where it just all unfolds with real explosives and all of that, and just a static shot. And to me, it has a different gravity, because it just feels like you're there watching it, because there are no edits facilitating things. There's no CG. There's nothing like that. It is, you are watching all these explosives that had to be kind of hidden throughout that shop, squibs on the guy who's behind the register and everything. So that was like, that was a bit of a gamble. But thanks for pointing it out. But
dude, there you go. No, I'm glad I can shout out. But dude, man, I love stuff like that. And like, what I love on top of that is that it literally, I mean, on top of it being a great scene, it says everything about the character. Like, this dude, just for no reason, just shoots the TV, and like, and even you know, I mean, the way you explore character, even in just the way they talk, and I guess on surface level, you hear these two guys talking about a sandwich. Well, you know, you're building these characters and you're just telling who these characters are. And so, I mean, obviously, this is something Gareth Dennis does amazingly in his work. He kind of puts a bow on his stories. I mean, character. I asked this to Sam Mendes the other day, but let me ask you: character always seems to be at the forefront of your story. Is that an intentional decision? You know, whether it be you know, you could have gotten wrapped up in the fact that it's a Western and something like Bone Tomahawk, but it's about the people to me. I mean, is character always at the forefront of your story?
Yes. The longer explanation is it's my writing process and it's one of these things where as I got more comfortable as a writer, I've gotten more and more comfortable with really not having an outline and having a general thing, a general destination for the characters. And so in something like Bone Tomahawk or Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos, there are people who are affected by a situation. In both cases, something bad happens at the beginning that affects all of the lead characters. And then how do they deal with it? And the writing process for me is getting in the minds of those people and figuring out how they deal with it. But at the same time, I try never to shortchange the villains and make them cartoonish, and really come up with why are they doing what they're doing, make them intelligent or have logic or both, in terms of you know how they're acting. So it winds up in this is something that was probably I went furthest with. This is Slanted Gutter. It's the most recent of my novels to come out, and I went really far with it on that book. I went really far with it in Wraiths of the Broken Land, and probably further and Dragged Across Concrete than the other two movies, where I am playing a little bit of a chess match against myself as the writer, because like I can say, and I don't want to spoil anything, but with Bone Tomahawk, the characters, a main character who lived in the movie died in my mind before I started writing it, and the other way around, someone else who died I thought was going to live, and it's just not how things developed. And some of it is because I'm living in the minds of the antagonists and the situation, and surprising things happen. And this guy I thought was going to live, something just happened to him. And this person who I thought was going to die, he just figured this thing out. So when you say that the character comes first, that's completely my writing process, is getting in the minds of the characters and trying for them to be and trying to make it so that they're making decisions logical and consistent with their characters. And it's a kind of, I remember, Kurt Russell said when we were prepping Bone Tomahawk, and he's, we were sitting around, we were doing rehearsal of the whole movie, just kind of going through the script and doing a run through. And he said, if you're an actor and don't know what to do with these characters the way they're written, you should retire. Like, it's so clear on the page where they come from.
Yeah.
And I don't have, like, obviously I can tell any actor, with any character what their motivation is. But the question isn't brought up that often, because they usually know, because it makes sense. There aren't things like, I hear a chainsaw behind that door. Let me go see what's going on. People are screaming in that house. Let me run into danger. Or something that's just like completely illogical, which can really, particularly with movies like this where the stakes are life and death, really unravel it. If you have some bad moments of no one, like, oh, this guy would never do this or something like that. And you make some, and it's fun to make surprising choices, like Bradley in Brawl in Cell Block 99 and Carlton Land in the new comic. These guys at a certain point both make sort of surprising decisions that tell you a lot about their inner character, despite mistakes that they have made, and that sort of thing. So it entirely comes from character, and I find that's a problem for me with a fair amount of fiction, when I feel that someone is imposing the plot on their characters because it feels like you're doing it the outside in, like you want this character to achieve these things, and like, let's say that whichever was I forgot the name of it. Maybe it was The Force Awakens, the first of the crappy new Star Wars movies. And like the woman is training to be a Jedi, and there's like kind of no doubt, and then she's amazing at it right away. And there's a reason, like, I read one Harry Potter book and I was like out. I'm like, this dude.
Harry Potter not for you, no?
No, not for me. And because I read the book, and it was and I remember, and I read tons of fantasy. Actually the most recent thing that I did was just write a fantasy book, but I said, well, he goes to school and he's immediately amazing at this Quidditch or Kidditch game or whatever it was. Like, he was immediately amazing. I'm like, where's the struggle there? Like, he's immediately the chosen boy who's great at things. And as opposed to like the characters in my pieces, and it certainly holds true for, I'll hold it up, the new comic,
Yeah.
Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. Like, this lead character is really flawed. The guys in Dragged Across Concrete, Brawl in Cell Block 99, Bone Tomahawk, Wraiths of the Broken Land, Mean Business on North Ganson Street. They're complex people. And it's interesting to see the different reactions that they get, and having like a heroic character who is just immediately great at everything and is completely, benevolent and, altruistic. I just find it less interesting. There have been good things that are written that way, but I find it less interesting.
Dude, I love the point you brought up about Bone Tomahawk and it kind of shifting. I'll ask you about that off air, but let me ask you this, man. I mean, I've asked this to Garth Ennis, and I don't think I've had the.
And to answer, I'm a huge Garth Ennis fan. So we could talk about him at length if you'd like to, but I realize like that's part of the questions you've asked me, but I haven't gotten around to answering. And I could tell you like what my favorite books of his are. And he's
All right, well, I do have a question for you, but no, let me ask you this: what is your favorite Garth Ennis book?
Dear Billy.
Ooh, that's a good
do you
one.
know Dear Billy?
Yes, The Boys, isn't it?
No.
No.
So I relish his Punisher run, and I think Born and Barracuda and the Slavers, those are fantastic.
I love the ones where he like uses the IRA, because that's just so fucking ballsy.
Like Kitchen.
Yeah, it was. I know it was Kitchen something, and I forget Finn McCool, where half of his face is hanging off your man's head, and he has that's my favorite, and like that's my favorite story arc. That
But my favorite stuff by him, are those Punisher Max titles I just said. Though there's a great Punisher story that he did that wasn't the Max line and the Marvel Knights line. There's one issue that he did. It's something like Nobody Catches You When You Fall in New York City or something. The title is something like that, or no one will catch you when you fall, something like that. It's just a one issue comic that's particularly good. But my outside of the Punisher Max stuff, my favorite stuff by him are his war comics. I'm very interested in World War II stuff.
My dad adores his war comics. He got this because we have this war stories like paperback, and we brought it because I got to meet Garth Ennis a couple of months ago, like out in the country. He was doing this kind of country Comic-Con run by my friend Paul Trimble. Everyone, it's back on, I think in June or July. I haven't checked, but I got to meet Garth Ennis there, and like we had this stack of of just stuff to get on. He was a really, really kind guy. But yeah, his war stories are just amazing.
So but I'll be like, yes, they are. But I'll be like even more specific. There are three, like my favorite comics of his are like, some arcs in the Punisher Max line, that one issue that I mentioned in the Marvel Knights line. I like all of the stuff that he's done with that character. But it's his war stories. There's one in the War Stories collection that's called D-Day Dodgers.
Yeah,
that is absolutely superb. That one's great to read. But my two favorites of his are in the Battlefields collection. So if you have the War Stories collection, I don't think they're in there.
No,
so it's the Battlefields collection. There's one called Night Witches, which is about these Russian women who flew planes. I don't want to give much away, but in World War II,
yeah,
on the front, and it's incredible. But even better than that for me, in my taste, is there's a story he wrote called Dear Billy, which I think is absolutely the best war.
I haven't read it. That's a deep cut. I'm gonna go check that out. Yeah,
absolutely the best war comic I've ever read, and absolutely one of probably the 10, if not 5 best pieces of war fiction, all movies and books that I've read on the subject included. It's superb, and it's I just mentioned, like, I'm not really interested in, like, I find it a less interesting choice if your hero is just an altruistic person who's immediately great at things, is the chosen person, and has all these fantastic abilities. Like, I want it earned. I like the character to face a lot of obstacles, to have maybe natural impediments that are character flaws, and all this sort of stuff. And so that Dear Billy story has that like tenfold. in terms of where the lead characters are coming from. In that situation, I'm particularly interested in the Pacific Theater of Operations in terms of World War II. It happens to be set there, but like those three to me, that like I haven't read all of his war comics. I've read a lot of them. Those are like the Holy Trinity, but that one in particular, Dear Billy, I think is it's one of the best works of war fiction, any medium, and definitely the best work of war fiction I've read as a comic. But like I would rank that with like Apocalypse Now. It's incredible.
Yeah. Oh, but dude, I have to check it out. No, I'm an Ennis aficionado, but you managed to catch me with something I haven't read. I'm gonna check that out. Let me ask you, have you read Preacher? I mean, it's the most famous one, but obviously, yeah.
Yeah. That was, back in the night. Yes, and I haven't read all of Preacher, but I enjoyed it. And the thing I'll say about Preacher was, as we were talking earlier about like the comics I read in the 80s, and that's obviously when I started, I was born in 73, and the 90s were a dark time for comics, for me, and I think a lot of people sort of looked like, just in terms of what was going on and all this kind of push to these like crazily muscled, like all of the stuff begat by like the Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Image look, and whether it's them or not. And I enjoyed a ton of Todd McFarlane comics, so I'm not gonna, it's not to bag on him, but the stuff that inspired was a lot of that stuff was really empty. So the 90s was a period like I read tons and tons of comics, like tens of thousands of pages of comics, maybe hundreds of thousands in the last 20, 22, 23 years. And I read tens of thousands of comics in the 80s. In the 90s, it was a bit of a trickle off. Like, I mean, like you had League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you had Sin City, and you had Preacher. And I didn't know who Garth Ennis was at that time. So there were some rays of hope. And I'm sure like the underground scene, I didn't know that much about then.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like before someone's frantically typing all the amazing stuff that came into the 90s, I mostly knew the main stuff. Like I knew what Image was, I knew Marvel, I knew DC, and a lot of that had turned in a direction I didn't like. And I remember reading Preacher, a roommate of mine gave it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, this is enjoyable. And then like putting it together later when I was reading, I think when I really got full on back into it, which was, when I was the Punisher characters one I'd grown up with, and I was checking out the Garth Ennis Punisher, the Marvel Knight stuff, and the Punisher Max stuff. And I was like, oh wow, this guy's great. And then dug deeper into his catalog. But that was the Preacher was one of the few things in terms of like a mainstream, readily available book in the 90s that I remember reading and enjoying.
Yeah.
A lot of what I read was it's got a Sin City and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and some other stuff. And I didn't yet know about like Daniel Clowes and Harvey Pekar, like all these guys that I read now. I just didn't know who they were then. So I know that there was good stuff then, but for me, Preacher was a ray of hope. And also nice that it was a new person, because the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Sin City, these were guys I was already reading in the 80s. It's just them doing stuff in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, dude, Ennis is a bomb. I don't know if you read the end of Preacher, but if you haven't, I recommend you should get on it, because I mean, dude, you have?
I've not.
Oh, you've not? Oh, dude, but I can't recommend it enough. I mean, it's hard for a comic to really emotionally get you. I mean, in films, I suppose it's kind of easier, with the sound, and you're kind of watching these characters. But with written words on a page and art, I mean, dude, like it's literally a good punch. I really recommend you check it out. But dude, yeah, Preacher's amazing. But let me ask you this. I also got to ask this to Garth.
I will guarantee a gut punch with Garth Ennis's Dear Billy, and I'll guarantee a gut punch with the War Stories story that's D-Day Dodger. Night Witches is excellent, and that has actually a little bit more of a shock to it. But in terms of that real emotional, that pathos really getting you, Dear Billy and D-Day Dodgers, you'll feel like D-Day Dodger will affect you. It, like for me, it like made me like, it really upset me, and then it makes you kind of furious in retrospect when you look at it. I mean, it does exactly what he wants it to do.
He's so good. I think he's probably, I'd put him up in the likes of some of Ireland's greatest storytellers. I genuinely feel that way. I put him, and he is just fantastic. I mean, fantastic writer in general. But yeah, no, let me ask you this. I'll also ask this to Garth, but I mean, in your work, I'm sure you get this a lot. I mean, the second you joined on the call, I was like, yo, man, I love your work. It's so fucked up. I mean, I only imagine you get that all the time. Are you ever afraid of going too far? Do you ever have to sit down and take yourself back and saying, maybe this is, because I asked this to Garth, and what was funny, Garth said to me, people actually often say to me, the publishers kind of expect that from me. And sometimes they're saying, do you want to go further? Do you want to lean more in this direction? Is that something that happened to you? I mean, what's that process like of you? Like, you do delve into the darkness and you're not afraid to explore this and take it to its, I mean, even Drag Across Concrete, you introduce a character, you get us to like them, and then it's like, dude. So I mean, let me ask you that. What's that process like for you?
So it's first and foremost, it's self-satisfaction. So when I'm going through this, when I'm going through something and I come up with something that I feel is too far, I mean, it usually it stays in, because usually if I'm having that reaction, it's making me uncomfortable. If
Yeah.
it's making me uncomfortable and I'm the person who conceived it, I feel that that reaction, like other people are going to have that reaction. I have certainly seen it with like in person and like, in screenings of my movies. I've seen it. I've seen the people walk out, or the gasps or the yells and
That
stuff
must
like
be
that.
some experience in the cinema. I can only imagine.
But one of the things, and it's, like something that I deal with is that not filtering myself and not censoring myself. And then I'm aware sometimes, and like wrongly, like sometimes they'll say, well, he's making this political point, which is not at all what I set out to do. I'm like about as dead set in the middle politically as a person can be. And so like that's not, there's nothing driving it, but I wouldn't stray away from something where like someone's like, well, this character says this, so Zahler must clearly believe that. So there are tons of wrong opinions about what I believe,
Yeah.
that like my friends and I laugh over all these assessments of who I am that are completely not right based on what my fictional characters say, but I'm not censoring them. And there are, like there are moments in my movies where a character will do something really surprising to me. And that might sound phony or weird to someone who doesn't go very deep in the creative process, but it is a surprise. Like there's a guy who visits Bradley in jail in Brawl in Cell Block 99. Makes a very dire threat against his wife. It wasn't the threat that I thought he was going to make, and I looked at it and I said, "Wow, this is really unnerving. This image that's just through dialogue." And I've been in the audiences where it's just like there's a peculiar kind of uncomfortable silence.
Can you feel it in the air?
Yeah, you feel it in the air, and obviously, like I'm like, well, like and it got that reaction from me, so I left it in the piece. I'm like, people are gonna like, I know some people are gonna make some extrapolations about my beliefs that aren't actually true based on this, but I'm not like, ultimately, I'm not making movies so that people can get to know me better. I'm making these things because I want to create something that I find artistically compelling, and then I hope other people have reactions to it. And that's something where I see a shorthand a lot of times that is untrue and certainly unfair, where I say like I'm chasing self-satisfaction, and they're like, well, he doesn't give a shit what the audience thinks. And it's not true. Like I enjoy when people like my stuff, and certain criticisms can penetrate more, but I'm not chasing that. And that like the difference that I'll point out is I want people to like the things that I do. But I'm not making any creative decisions so that more people like the things that I do. So it's not, there's not an outside in, like, I hope people will like it. Like when my scripts go out to my team, like my agent, my manager, like, and all the people, with whom I work, it's pretty much finished. By the time I share it, like that first draft of that I shared with people of Dragged Across Concrete, that's 98% the movie you see.
Oh yeah.
And the time I'm putting it out there, yeah, it's by the time I'm sharing it with people, it is that finished thing, and I want people to like it. But I'm not, people, there are absolutely moments in all of those movies when they were scripts, when I was in the editing room, when money people saw them, they're like, please get rid of this. Can you remove this? All that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, I was in a position to have enough creative control to keep everything I wanted.
Yeah.
And but I am aware, like if I was chasing the biggest audience possible, I would not be making the movies that I'm making, nor would I do like, I'm super proud of this comic book. There's a lot of science here. It's not like nonstop action. And people who want like a hard science fiction, like true science fiction experience, are going to enjoy it. But someone who wants a Star Wars science fantasy with a bunch of action and humanoid aliens and all that sort of stuff, that's not what I'm going for. Obviously, that's a bigger audience, but it's just like having the confidence to say, like, I know what I'm trying to deliver because I like this sort of thing. Like you interviewed Duncan Jones, and I think Moon is the best science fiction movie of the last 20 years, easy.
Yeah.
I saw it 3 times in the theater, and it does what I want science fiction to do. It makes me wonder. It has that sense of wonder about like, what is identity in that case? What is identity and individuality, and like how much of a human is just pattern recognition and
Yeah, man.
DNA replication, and all that stuff is in there. Plus, I had Sam Rockwell, who's fantastic. Like,
Oh, I love Sam Rockwell.
he's great. He's great. So, to answer your question, often when I'm doing something that's dark, I wonder, I'll have that moment where I feel like I went too far, but I'm trying to think of any time I ever pulled it back. And it would have only been if it was a plotting thing, like something really nasty happened. And then I realized like, oh, that shouldn't happen here, but no, not really censoring anything. I mean, certainly like, there's some scenes in Bone Tomahawk and Brawl in Cell Block 99, like that would not make R-rated movies. I mean, if they got ratings, those would both be NC-17.
Yeah.
And that is partly as a function of me not pulling back when I feel it is further. But I feel that there are sparks when you play with that. Like when you go a little bit further, and because I grew up as a Fangoria gore hound, watching extreme horror movies from the age of 13 onward, like for something to be shocking to me in terms of gore, it needs to be pretty strong. And for something to be shocking to me in terms of plot, it needs to be a legitimate surprise. So that's why like my writing process of figuring out the characters and surprising myself daily will yield that.
How does it feel when someone says to you, I was watching your film and I had to look away? Is that like the highest compliment you could get?
It is. Well, this is the thing. I'm not like, although this might not seem apparent, or perhaps you might think I'm just full of it. I'm not chasing the experience where people look away, because I do want people to enjoy the full experience. I'm a real purist in terms of that stuff. Like if I go see a movie, like I think with one exception, 25 years ago, where I'd maybe had a little bit too much beer before the movie and I ran out. The second time I saw Once Upon a Time in China Part, I think it was 5, to use the restroom for 1 minute. I won't leave. And one time when I saw a movie in the actual theater caught on fire, like I'm there from before the credits start.
And you were forced to leave.
Yes, I was forced to leave. Before the credits start to after the credits finish, long before people were putting little things very often at the end of the credits. So I want the full experience. So if someone tells me they looked away, I was like, oh, there's a little part of the movie that you didn't actually see. But I would say higher compliments than grossing people out would be when I'm sitting in a movie theater and there's an emotional, like a sad part. I think, like in terms of that stuff, I think that there's an end section of Brawl in Cell Block 99 that I personally find the most affecting of the 3 in terms of emotions. And when I hear people sniffling, because I know and there's a scene with a hurt horse in Bone Tomahawk, and something with Jennifer Carpenter in Dragged Across Concrete. When I can hear people affected that way, because like you can show something gross and maybe shock almost anybody. But in terms of if you're getting tears and having people that invested in the characters and the life of the characters, that to me is a higher level of success. So actually, like, I mean, I've seen people storm out during those gross scenes. I've seen people look away and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I saw a screening of Bone Tomahawk, and like a certain particularly infamous scene happened. I probably saw like 25 people walk out of that theater when they just got up and exited. And that isn't like, I want people to stay to the end, because the whole movie, the be all end all of the movie for me is not the gore. I'm sure there's some gore hounds who are just like, this shit is boring until some gory shit happens. That's not my view. But the highest compliments for me are when people are really invested in the characters, and there's like a monologue that Chicory has in Bone Tomahawk about a flea circus that will get singled out as like a favorite scene from a lot of people, and that more than like a really violent scene. And hearing people emotionally connecting in that way with the characters, and also hearing people laugh, like actually like all the Fred Melamed stuff, the guy who's running the bank and Dragged Across Concrete, and actually the one actor who's been in all 3 of my movies, when he comes out and is speaking in a really grandiloquent manner, and everyone like and like every line he's saying is getting a giant laugh, which was the case at some screenings that I've been to. That's actually, I would say, probably big laughs, and knowing that people are very emotionally connected to the characters are more satisfying than people looking away from the gore. But I'm not like immune to that having its charm as well.
Can you watch your films? If I fucking got a TV and played Bone Tomahawk, would you be able to watch it, or is it like, no, I can't? Like I've heard editing room 400 times the premiere and then never again for the rest of your life until maybe you're 70 and you're dying. Then you might watch it. Is it the
Oh,
same
I
for you?
didn't know. It's funny that you say that. I've not watched any of my movies since there were so they're screened all over the world, at festivals. They all have pretty limited theatrical releases, and then it's just puzzling where what gets released. Like all of like Dragged Across Concrete, it's like Israel, Russia, and Arizona. Like I can't tell you the rhyme or reason because it's going to be, in a lot of cases, like foreign like distributors
Yeah.
that are handling that. And so I toured around with it. Sometimes I would stay for the screenings and watch the movie with the crowd. Oftentimes this is something to do if you're going to do if I did a Q&A afterwards. And in all three cases, the movies were added to the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which is a great honor for me. And they screened it as part of they have like kind of a best of films for the year. And so in all three cases, the last time I saw the movie was a screening at the Museum of Modern Art. And I did a Q&A. The people there, Sean Egan and Dave Kerr, are great. They're real champions of my work. Helped me get into Venice, with my second movie and my third movie.
Yeah.
And so those are really good experiences. I haven't returned to them since.
No.
It's not that I'll never watch them again, but I am very meticulous. And so in all cases, I had to do quality check on my movies. And there are people who do this professionally, but then I check them, and then in all three movies, I'm finding errors that they didn't find. So what will happen is like I'm seeing 5 shots that are 1/24th of a second out of sync or something like that, and then they correct it, and then I want to make sure nothing else happened, and then I need to watch the entire movie, which in the case of Dragged Across Concrete is 2 hours and 39 minutes and change. So like I'm doing a couple of corrections, and then I'm rewatching the entire movie. So that what you've heard from other people is a bit my experience. I can say in terms of things that I've done, like I revise my books to death before they come out, and I don't pick them up. But it is different with like my comics. I've read them since they've come out, and my albums I listen to them since they've come out. They're kind of different. Like there's not the point where there's a mind-numbing amount of repetition that's happening with just a fiction book, where I'm literally spending hundreds and hundreds of hours just nitpicking sentences, where like in a process I have to just at a certain point just call, because I could just do it forever. And the same thing with a movie, where I'm just watching the entire thing because like 5 things are slightly out of sync, or the color grading on a couple of shots got off, and now they have to process the whole thing again, but in reprocessing something else could have shifted. So I can't just trust. I have to actually watch the whole thing again. So there's a process towards the end of these things where I'm watching these movies like 8 to 14 times, which is a lot.
Like Coppola can never watch The Godfather, and that's the most heartbreaking thing ever. I mean, he talked about this in the DVD commentary. I mean, I talked to Christopher McQuarrie, and he was telling me like, oh, he was watching the director's commentary for Godfather, and Coppola was pining over shots he didn't use or errors, and it's like, fucking, if your man who made Godfather is looking at his film and criticizing it, there's not much hope for the rest of us.
That's there. Though I will go on. I think that the sequel is far better. I like Godfather, but I adore Godfather too.
Really?
Yeah, I just the richness of that atmosphere, just that destructive family dynamic. And I would like at that time I would much rather watch Al Pacino as like the bona fide lead throughout the whole thing than Brando. I always felt his performance. I guess I'm probably tramping on a sacred cow for some people. It felt like an actor choice, that putting his stuff in the cheeks and speaking in that way. I love any scene where he's not talking. I really like him, but when he's talking, I feel it just feels affected. It feels like a conscious choice to differentiate that character from who he is. But to me, it doesn't escape it whenever he's talking. But there are, and all the stuff with John Cazale, I've heard it said a couple different names. the stuff with Fredo and Godfather 2. I mean, this stuff is unbelievable. I'm a huge fan of Godfather. It's not to rip on that, but I think the second one is probably like that one and Goodfellas are probably like my favorite gangster movies of all time. Those two.
That's amazing. I mean, let me ask you this. One of my last questions before I let you go. Talk to me about some of your favorite films. We talked Taxi Driver, which Taxi Driver is a film which literally, I think it literally oozes evil almost. It's just so, there's an aura from it.
It is trance-inducing. Like watching that movie, and I, there's a little bit you need to clear your head after that movie. There's a real hypnotic quality to the voiceover, right? It has that, and then well, I mean, it's just wasn't this what was it? Was it Hinckley? Like someone who shot at or shot like President Reagan, who was obsessed with Jodie Foster. It was like he was affected by that movie. And you can't blame the art for that sort of thing, but I can say as someone who is not going to go out and ever shoot a president, it's hypnotizing. The music, Bernard Herrmann's finest. I mean, to me, it's one of the all-time great movie scores. It's incredible. But the voiceover and the mantras that are repeated again and again, and it's just some of like, it's just like he's, some of the like a slow dolly in slow motion as he's observing someone and disgusted by that person or angry with that person.
Yeah.
And then, unlike a lot of movies where it's just sort of relentlessly dark or nasty, I like The Wrestler and I like The Whale, these two Aronofsky movies. Man, what I wouldn't give for both of those movies to have some humor, because I think if it's so monotonously.
Have you seen The Whale?
Yeah, I saw The Whale.
Is it good?
I like it. Yes,
I can't wait to see it.
It's like in kind of the Wrestler sort of zone of like endlessly bleak. And so like The Wrestler, I just think these movies would actually be more upsetting if there were some scenes where it was brighter and there were more rays of hope. Because if someone's like do you seen The Wrestler?
Yeah, Mickey Rourke.
Yeah. So like a movie like that, if you got a better sense that there was some more aspects to his life, I just feel like you'd feel with him more. Where it's like when someone is really just kind of miserable and you just watch them miserable throughout the whole movie, the stakes I think are lower because it's not like they're going to lose something good. It's like, maybe these people should be put out of their misery. And so The Whale has a little bit of that. But with what I was going to say with Taxi Driver, one of the things that makes it like my, in my top 5 favorite movies of all time, and yes, I do have a list, is there's humor in it and it's good. The stuff with Albert Brooks is really funny, and some of the philosophizing with Peter Boyle is really funny when he's like, you become a thing and maybe that's what you are, and and Travis Bickle's like, yeah, that's some of the stupid.
That's about the most dumbest thing I ever heard.
Yeah. So all of that stuff to me makes the world more three-dimensional. And like, you've you read this comic, you've seen my movies, and I could say this holds true with all of my books as well, and everything. Like, there's always going to be humor. There's going to be a reason. There are going to be other, no matter how dark it gets, there are going to be some elements to the world that aren't monochromatic, and where you get a sense of life and love and joy in the world, and and something would be lost if things go badly for the protagonist. But yeah, Taxi Driver, definite top.
What else is on your list? Your top 5?
2001 is my favorite movie of all time.
Oh, well, yeah, it'd have to. That's a film. I've heard Jaws and 2001 for making directors want to be directors. I mean, when the club goes in the air and the spaceship, so yeah, 2001.
Yeah, and as someone like I'm from a Jewish family, but I'm an atheist, and so for me, something like 2001 and really proper, excellent, like science, like sense of wonder science fiction, or when I just read like a science book or hear really interesting like scientific extrapolations and reading about whatever string theory or dark energy or dark matter or cosmology, cosmogony, and all this sort of stuff. 2001 is a religious experience, and I don't say that lightly. Like,
wow, man,
the sense of awe that I have when I watch that movie. And I've never watched it at home, and I don't think I ever will. I've seen it like 70 millimeter projection and IMAX projection, and it is just this larger. It couldn't be larger than life, and it's something where you really see like man's place in the universe and how small it is, and the vastness of space and also time. And as it gets into, I think every time I see it, I come up with different interpretations, because there's stuff in there that to me looks like it's dealing with like quantum realities in terms of collapse of the wave function, and like, is Schrodinger's cat alive or dead? It seems to have some of that stuff in there. But the last time I saw it, I picked up on more of that. But when I'd seen it, years ago, I knew less about eigenstates and whatever. I just read less science. And so that is an absolutely awe-inspiring movie where I'm getting chills. Probably like 20 minutes of that experience. It seems I can't believe like human beings made it. Yeah. And it is otherworldly, and it's fantastic. So that would be my number one. Number two would be The Wild Bunch, by Sam Peckinpah.
Oh, Peckinpah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the Western that got me into Westerns. Obviously, that had a big impact on me, and I think it's my second favorite movie of all time. It's incredible. So it would be that, Bridge on the River Kwai.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and that is an absolute. Yeah, I mean, it's this thing, like whether it's art or war or a human being's life, it just says a ton without saying it all directly, in the scope of it and the scale. Like that's something where you really kind of, or I do anyways, like, oh, this is when it was just all practical. Like, you want to make that bridge, you're making that bridge. You want to have all these people, those people are there. It's not like they're not being like rotoed in, like with CG and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So the spectacle is huge, but the complexity, it's amazing. So I've got that, and then the fourth would be Sweet Smell of Success, which I've probably seen 6 times on the big screen. Like, that is revived constantly in New York City, so I get to see it again and again. Like, when I'm in the mood to see it, I'm like, oh, it's playing again in film form. Oh, it's playing again in anthology film. Have you seen that movie?
No. Who directs it?
Oh man, is it? This is bad that I'm not like. I always think of the writer. It's the writers, and it's Ben Hecht and Clifford Odets. I think it might be Mankiewicz. It's terrible that I don't know that, but it's Burt Lancaster, it's Tony Curtis, and and the reason I can tell you both of the writers with a certainty. If you can look it up, go ahead and look it up.
What's it called?
The Sweet Smell of Success. Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, and
Alexander McKendrick. Yes.
Okay. So it's not. So this isn't really a director. Offhand, I couldn't name another person by this. I think of this as certainly the movie. I would say this is the best screenplay of any movie I've ever seen, in terms of line by line how good the dialogue is. There's nothing like this.
I have to check it out.
It's absolutely phenomenal, and it's dark. Like, it's that's a period where Hollywood,
for 1957.
So a lot of my favorite movies come from the 50s, and there's a lot of what was happening kind of at the 50s. Before the 60s, I felt like eventually like that loosened up the reins, and you get a lot of them, like Rosemary's Baby and Wild Bunch and 2001. Like, a lot of that stuff is kind of coming later in the decade, but in the 50s, I feel like it still has the studio feel and some of those kinds of performances and some of that kind of look, but it was starting to get much more morally sophisticated. Yeah. So you're getting a little bit of what was good about like a 30s and 40s Hollywood movie, but you're getting like a different level of moral sophistication and greatness. So, but Sweet Smell of Success would be that one.
Fourth. And what's your fifth?
No, fifth is Taxi Driver, and I'll say 6 is Once Upon a Time in the West, and then after that, it probably degenerates into a bunch of movies that are sort of similar. Like, I love Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
That's definitely not a film I expected you to say.
I saw that. I've seen that movie 7 times in the theater, and that was an early movie for me to become obsessed with. I think that movie and Speedy, the Harold Lloyd. It's a Harold Lloyd comedy, so a silent comedy. Like, those are my 2 favorite comedies ever. But yeah, Pee-wee's Big Adventure is incredible.
Dude,
are you a fan? Have you seen it?
Yeah, that's the Paul Rubin.
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen it. I remember watching that back in the day. Yeah, man. Yeah, that's such a. Out of all the Zahler films, it goes from Taxi Driver to Pee Wee Herman. I think they're the same. They're similar. Have you ever seen any of McDonagh's films? Martin McDonagh's In Bruges, 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, Banshees of Inisherin.
I've seen 3 Billboards, and I've seen a couple of his plays.
If you haven't seen In Bruges, oh, dude.
A friend of mine told me I needed to see that, and I've spent some, Bruges is nice, very good chocolate and beer there.
You've been to Bruges. That's such a weird place to be. I've never been to Bruges. I mean, next year our school we get to go on a trip, and I'm gonna try and see if they'll bring us to Bruges just because I want to see where they filmed it. But dude, in Bruges, he has the new Banshees of Inisherin, which is in cinemas now. I saw it. I got to go to the Irish premiere, and it's a great film. So I really like that. But yeah, in Bruges. I can see the similarities between you two. I mean, with the gallows humor in your work. So I think you'd enjoy his work. I'd be interested, especially to hear what you'd say about his work. But you should check it out.
Yeah, I will. Is the new one? Is it gangster stuff? Is it crime stuff? Or no? The Banshees thing.
The Banshees of Inisherin, right? It's set on an island. It's set on an island off the coast of Ireland, and it's literally about two friends. One friend turns to the other friend and says, "I don't want to be friends anymore." And the whole film just devolves from that. It's just fucking great, man. Like literally, it's almost like a play in that. I mean, in Bruges, I mean, Three Billboards is obviously kind of larger in scope, but this literally about two friends. Brendan Gleeson turns to Colin Farrell and says, "I don't want to be friends anymore," and it just gets crazier from there. And it literally, and so many people have come away with different interpretations from it. You know, whether it's about masculinity or whether it's about the fleeting nature of life. But dude, I really love it, and it's great that everyone's coming away with different meanings. But if you get the chance to check it out, I think you might enjoy. I'd be very interested to hear what a writer like you would have to say. That'd be a really fascinating thing for me. But yeah, check it out if you get the chance. But you saw Three Billboards?
I did, and I saw. Man, it was a long time ago. I saw two different plays of his. One was, I think the name of one was A Behanding at Spokane.
Yes.
Something. And it was Christopher Walken and Sam Rockwell. And Sam Rockwell's stuff was hilarious. Christopher Walken, to me, his performance, I felt, and I like him, but I felt on stage, I don't know if he was pushing it, but it felt like theatrical. To me, Sam Rockwell was incredible and really, really funny. Because he kind of like, there's some breaking the fourth wall stuff that can be risky in a dramatic play. But the Sam Rockwell stuff was hilarious. So I saw Behanding.
Seven Psychopaths. Martin McDonagh directs Sam Rockwell in Seven Psychopaths. You seen Seven Psychopaths?
I've not.
Dude, that's one of my favorites as well. It's like that's kind of a crime film. It's so funny and it's great as well. I mean, it's such a hard time. I probably put maybe in I don't even know my favorite film. He's one of those directors all the films. It's the same with you. I don't have a favorite because all your films are just, like they're equal to me. They're just all so good. I think it's the same. Seven Psychopaths. I can't believe I forgot about that one. That's such a funny film. That's probably his funniest out of all of them. But Sam Rockwell's literally fantastic in that. But yeah, dude, you should check it out. When are we getting to Sam Rockwell and Zahler collaboration?
He and I have been in touch. I would hope so. I would love to work with him. We had let's say ships passing on one of the pictures, but I saw him actually at Venice, and he expressed interest in working with me, and I think he's incredible. So I would love to work with him.
Dude, wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, let me ask you this before I let you go. I've taken up so much time. I apologize. What's next for Zahler? What's next for you, man? Film wise, TV.
Next for me is, well, I just finished writing a fantasy book. So a lot of actually how I learned to write Westerns and stuff comes from my interest in fantasy, and it's high fantasy. It's a completely made up world. There's magic. Strange creatures. It's not a traditional fantasy world. Like there are no dragons. It isn't castles and kings, but it's a completely made up high fantasy world. So that's something I spent about 10 months on in 2022. And right now I have a TV show, an animated show or movie, and a feature film that's a crime piece, and a feature film that's really long. Even by my standards, that's a horror piece, and I'm taking all of them around to see what can get financed. So it's a process. Like Bone Tomahawk, if you go online and dig, you'll see an announcement for that movie with Kurt Russell, Richard Jenkins, and 3 other people. So there was a version of that happened, and then that version collapsed. It was with Peter Sarsgaard, Timothy Oliphant, and Jennifer Carpenter. And so that version collapsed, and the version that I made is the version I made. And I'm super happy with the version I made in that cast. But it's a process. My process is in terms of how I can get something done, because I'm not in the studio system. Like I live in New York. I'm not really cut out for studio work. As it might be readily apparent, the kind of creative control I want. So
is there any IP you'd like to touch, or are you happy doing your own stuff?
I'm happy doing my own stuff. There's the one IP that, and I've had pitches for it forever, but no one knows how to undo it because there's so many giant names involved. I've always like Gremlins. The original
You
Gremlins.
watched the Gremlins, yeah?
Yeah, the original Gremlins was a giant movie for me as a kid. I saw it again and again and again in the theater, and I had the little toys, and I had like some ideas for Gremlins movies.
Would it be
But
PG or would you just go fucking like 18?
I mean, let's put it this way: if I ever got access to that IP, I'm sure I would. I would have parameters dictated to me, and I would accept it for that IP. Other than that, I pretty much just want to do my own stuff. Like with Gremlins, I'm like, I didn't create the Gremlins, so someone else,
Yeah.
other people need to throw like Chris Columbus's name on there. Spielberg's name is on there. There are like so many famous people who have a piece of the, Dante, who have a piece of the pie on that one. So it's tricky because I've tried a few times. So that's really that's really the one. But outside of that, like pretty much all the stuff I generate is original. I mean, I wrote the script for a reboot of Puppet Master, but like of the long list of things I've done, they're all original. Like I mean, for the most part, if I like something, I'm happy for other people to do it. But then you get people like obviously Garth. Like I don't think I've never heard anyone who's read the Garth Ennis Punisher think that any other Punisher ever existed that was comparable to that. I mean, maybe someone has followed up Garth Ennis. I haven't read the Jason Aaron stuff.
I love Jason Aaron. I think he did it very good. And like I'll always love Jason Aaron because I had like like when I was just starting out interviewing comic book creators, I had like 10 names and he took the time to come on. I'll always love him for that. But yeah, he's great. I love his Punisher stuff. I think you might enjoy it as well if you check it out. But yeah, I'd be interested.
But that's the kind of thing where like in the case of Garth Ennis with Punisher, Frank Miller, and Batman,
Dude, you on a Punisher, Max. Get you on a Punisher, Max. That'd be great. I mean, you're exploring the comic book world.
Yeah, so at the limit, like the next comic I do is going to be science fiction, and it's going to be kind of as I did this one. There are a couple of like if you talk about working on other IPs in the comic world, there are a few. So I thought your question was just with movies where it's really just Gremlins. In comics, Punisher, Judge Dredd.
Judge Dredd, yeah, man.
Yeah, I grew up reading those characters. Batman, in a way, Incredible Hulk, because I feel like the proper Incredible Hulk story I've never seen. Because it's weird, like with Punisher, it's tricky because I'm like, I don't think I'm writing a better Punisher than Garth Ennis's Punisher. Yeah. But with the Incredible Hulk, I'm like, I've never read the Incredible Hulk that I want to read.
He's a Hulk
out of control Hulk that I would write.
He's such a fascinating character, literally Jekyll. I don't know if you read Immortal Hulk, but I got the omnibus for Christmas.
I read some of it, and that's the thing is that it tends to go very science fiction, and I thought that whole thing with the green door was a little bit like the green in Swamp Thing, like that sort of idea. That I just read the first collection, like the first 6 issues. I enjoyed it enough to get the second, bunch of 6 issues, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, you should check it out, man.
I think there's a version of that where they really tap the like Jekyll and Hyde potential, but like when he's Hulk, like he's doing atrocious stuff and someone wrestling with it. When legitimately like the Incredible Hulk I would have an interest in doing would not be at all heroic. Like it would really just be wrestling with this thing, and maybe some people are trying to use him and they've got like cattle prods and are trying to get him to do their bidding, but like he's actually an out of control monster. I think the most great. Right, I think that version isn't there. Whereas like Judge Dredd, all the stuff that Wagner, I think it was like Wagner and Grant wrote together. But like
Alan Grant, who is he's such a great writer, and I was fortunate enough. I've chatted with his wife before, and she sent me this amazing book they did right before he passed. And yeah, he is as far as writers go, I reckon at least one of the most underrated writers, especially in comic books of the last generation. People should put him up with Alan Moore and Frank Miller, and I feel that way. I feel like the work he's done is often overlooked, but I think he's amazing, man. But yeah, that's some great names.
Like and so like him and like writing Judge Dredd and with Wagner, like they clearly have nailed it, and Ennis did some Judge Dredd as well. Yeah. That's something like the asterisk next to me working on any IP in comics at this point is I would want to draw it. So like the artists in 2080 are much more skilled than I am, and the artists who are drawing for Marvel and DC also have a different skill set. So it would be them kind of coming to terms with like a less skilled artist, though maybe I would have a conversation probably at that point of me penciling it and maybe some better artists inking it and kind of like meeting in the middle. So
Yeah.
like, yes, in the world of comics, I have an interest in some stuff that's not my original. Once I've done my third original comic, like after I've done that, Judge Dredd, Punisher, Incredible Hulk, like all those have interest. Venom, actually, surprisingly, I think some people have done some interesting stuff with him.
That's a name I didn't expect to hear from you, but dude, yeah, you on all those characters, I feel would be fantastic. Zahler, my last question before I let you go: what advice would you have for anyone looking to become a filmmaker?
Advice that I got when I was in film school was there are tons of great directors out there, and it's very hard to distinguish yourself as a director. It's much easier to distinguish yourself as a writer. First, it doesn't really cost anything because you can just write and write and write and send the stuff out. And I think it will also make you a better director. So when I was in film school, I really didn't focus at all on writing. And now, first and foremost, the thing I think I'm best at and I'm most confident doing, as we discussed, is writing. So I'd say people who want to go into film, like you can learn all the technique, but there are tons of people who are directing, music videos and commercials and, corporate stuff who are going to have similar skill sets. And some of what will just distinguish those people from you is the content of your piece.
Yeah.
The content of the piece is going to come from you writing something that is interesting and original content. So I'd say focus on the story and the content as opposed to coming at it from the outside of like, I like slow motion, or I like wide angle lenses, or I like telephoto lenses, or stuff like that. Like distinguishing yourself as a storyteller and finding your singular voice, which it will be difficult if your singular voice is, I love every Marvel movie and I love all of that stuff and I just want to make that. It's going to be hard to distinguish yourself as compared to someone like probably my favorite filmmaker of recent years is a guy named Yorgos Lanthimos.
Yeah, Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Killing of the Sacred Deer and The Lobster and was it The Favorite? Like he's incredible. Like there's a unique writing presence there. There's a unique way he's like everything is unique. Like everything that he is doing seems like he is doing it. And so find your own voice. And I think you want to get into film, finding your own voices. Think a lot about the conceptual level and not just the superficial trappings of directing something that looks slick, because tons of people can do that and fewer people are coming up with original ideas and presenting a singular voice. So that would be my advice.
That's some amazing advice, Zahler. It's truly been such a pleasure, Sharon. Before I let you go, any new projects you can promote? Are you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Obviously, Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. People can go get that from their local comic book store.
This is a new comic from put out by Dark Horse. I'm incredibly proud of this thing. I've gotten some cool blurbs from like here we got Brian Michael Bendis, Patton Oswalt,
Brian Michael Bendis,
Justin Lin, the director of Fast Five. So I've gotten a lot of great support.
Justin Lin, you have the connections. Go man, Justin Lin's an amazing director.
Amazing director. So it's been extremely well received, and also people are kind of surprised with like how scientific it is and how different it is than my movie. So I'm extraordinarily proud of that. The first comic I did, Forbidden Surgeries of the Hideous Dr. Divinus. Let me try and get it so the silver patches. This might be a little bit more along the lines of what someone might expect from me. It's certainly more violent. It's like it has the crime aspect of like Dragged Across Concrete, but then an old style, old school, like 1950s horror vibe. And then my most recent book, The Slanted Gutter, which is certainly my most intricately plotted piece. And this is a pretty nasty crime book. Like all this stuff you can find on Amazon, and some of this like Forbidden Surgeries you can certainly find on the Floating World comics website. Is available there. So I've gotten some nice support from people in the industry. Check those things out. I update, like my website is scraigzahler.com, and I'll put in the banner when you first go to the page something new, like this comic is coming out, or I'm doing a signing or something like that. But sort of going to my website, or I have a Goodreads page where I'll put updates on occasion and put up reviews of books and comics and things that I enjoy up there. Those are the two best places to find me and see if there's anything current.
Dude, hopefully one day you get to do a signing in Ireland. I'd love to get my very own Zahler autograph, frame that in the room. So if you're ever in Ireland, dude, that'd be amazing. But man, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Everyone, before we finish up, you can follow me over on Twitter if you'd like, DanielFeed33. And as always, if you have the means, please make sure to donate to the National Deaf Training Society. Link in the description. Are you on social media, Craig?
No, to my detriment, no. I have so many interests. I'm doing appearances such as this, but I when I'm not working, because I had 10 months of working straight. When I'm not working, I'm reading, I'm playing board games, I'm seeing movies and stuff like that, and I don't want to get pulled into it. Eventually, I might get roped in, but no, I don't.
You're a better man than I am, Zahler. It's not too late to save you. Don't do it. You're young and full of life. Don't do it. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm already decrepit. It's ruined me already. So fuck it. I don't care anymore. But dude,
great way to be in touch and get people to watch you. And obviously, it works for you. You have done well with getting a bunch of interesting people on your show. So hats off to you.
oh, dude, thank you so much. I'll toss you a little bit off air, but this has been my interview with Zahler himself. Everyone, Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos from your local comic store. I cannot recommend it enough. When your next book comes out, Zahler, I'll have you back on the show, and we'll just. By then, I'll have watched all your recommendations from the 50s, and we can. But I'll definitely have read Dear Billy by then. But no, dude, thank you so much for chatting me. Everyone, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Bye.